Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Ray Paprocki, publisher of Dispatch magazines. That includes Columbus CEO. Welcome to Diverse Leaders in Law. It's our ongoing series that explores diversity and gender issues in the legal profession. We started in the fall of 2020, and this is our fourth installment. Today's topic is George Floyd. 1 year later, how far have we come? Many thanks to our partners, Barnes and Thornburg and Frost Brown Todd. They've been an integral part of crafting these discussions through the past year. Now I'd like to introduce Noel Shepard of Frost Brown Todd. Noel?
Thanks, Ray. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here today, and we really appreciate being a part of this series. Throughout the series, we've been given the opportunity to do a little intro. So in the past, I've given some ideas of some of the things that we've done in the diversity inclusion space just throughout our firm and programs, just to give ideas for others. So this past month was June, Pride Month was June. And as part of promoting our LGBTQ community and supporting them throughout the firm and Columbus area, we had a series of discussions around the documentary Cured. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend looking it up and watching it. It's very informative. And we then had a panel discussion with the writers and co-directors. So it's something that's educational and can teach you a lot about the past and what to look forward to. Thanks again for coming, and I look forward to hearing the panel discussion today.
Thanks, Noel. And now Katie Smith. She holds dual roles of editor of Columbus CEO Plus. She's business editor of the Columbus Dispatch. Katie.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks everybody for being here with us today. We have a great panel. Our panelists today are Don Rosemond, firm diversity partner with Barnes and Thornburg. Welcome, Don. We've got Kelly Livingston, assistant vice president and senior counsel, global technology and intellectual property, JPMorgan Chase. Welcome, Kelly. And we have with us former Columbus Mayor Michael Coleman, who is a partner at Ice Miller. Thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thank you.
So we thought today's topic was timely. It's been a year. We have a George Floyd verdict, but that barely represents a beginning in the fight for racial equity. The critical work of leveling the playing field for Black and Brown people must continue, and that must include changes in the corporate world. I wanted to ask the panelists, you guys are all leaders in your organizations, you're leaders in the community. What has the past year been like for you personally as you've grappled with the heavy issues of racism and equity? I know Kelly and Don shared in your earlier conversation that you both changed your hair during the past year to reflect deep changes within yourselves.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Thank you, Katie. And that's not, in and of itself. I mean, women change their hair all the time. So that's not, and it by itself doesn't sound terribly profound. And it wasn't necessarily, for me at least, I wasn't trying to necessarily make some sort of global statement, but it was very personal to me. Last year was hard, and that's such an understatement. It was just, but it was unlike anything I ever experienced. I recall actually, my mother at one point remarking toward, after May 25th, and just not being, I wasn't really able to pull myself out the way I normally am when impacted by some of these things. She remarked to me that, she's like, wow, you seem to be stuck. You're not recovering like you normally do. And she was right. I was not. I'm a mom of two wonderful young Black men, and they're teenagers, and all of the the fears and all the things that we were watching, what the world saw was this man they may or may not have known named George Floyd being killed on TV. What I saw were my sons. What I saw was my husband. Those sorts of things. My brother. So who happens to be an officer, by the way. So there's a lot of things going on. So it was really, really difficult. And so when I shared that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Katie, like for me, it was just a lot of changes internally. And I think some things shifted for me in fundamental ways. I had to contend with and come to grips with. I'd been masking still, even though I thought I wasn't anymore. Been masking for a long, long time. And my phrasing, I felt like I had been, downplaying my Blackness, if you will, for the comfort of others for most of my career. And so, when we were talking about my hair, it was because if you just go back even maybe 5 years ago, I never would have my hair like this, because I wouldn't have been comfortable at work, because I would have felt exposed, too Black, too ethnic, too something, not professional, not smart, not something. And I don't care anymore, because I know I'm those things. And I don't really need anybody to tell me that anymore. So it's just last year was hard, and it continues. It has, it's not over. The moment is over. We have a verdict, but there's a lot still to be done. But really, really impacted me on a deep, deep level personally, as we work to navigate through this as a parent, as a professional, as a colleague, as a mom, all those things.
No. I second what she says. I think that the past year has been one of great growth for me, both personally and professionally. Personally, because much like Dawn, this past year, I've really become truly comfortable in my own skin and in my own Blackness, which is something to say for the fact that I'm how old? I mean, we'll just say 29 for the video's sake, but I'm, at this point in my life and at this point in my career, and just now becoming fully comfortable with who and what I am, a Black woman. When you mentioned the hair, that was me in our call that we had, and I'd shared that a couple of years ago, I had been at a client location, and I had been wearing my hair natural. Right now, my hair is in locks, which I've had them in for about the past year. But at the time, I was wearing my hair natural in its natural curly state. And I was sitting there one day, and I felt something on me, and I wasn't sure if it was a bug. And I realized that someone was touching my hair, like massaging my hair, and told me that they liked the way my hair felt. And I never felt more, I don't want to say victimized, but I felt like I was an object, like I was a curiosity. And, at this point in my life and this point in my career, it's not something that I felt very comfortable with, right? So, I was wearing my hair natural, which is something that I didn't do very frequently at the time. And at the time, I was thinking about getting locks, but I was like, wow, if they can't deal with, and if I'm a curiosity for them now when my hair is just in its natural curly state, I could never go to locks. So I kind of suppressed and didn't change the way that my hair looked at the time, because I wanted to conform. I wanted to fit in. I feel as though for, a large part of my career, I probably have done exactly that. I've gone along to get along, which means, you eschew the uncomfortable conversations about, race, politics, equality, those types of things. Why? Because they make people feel uncomfortable. They don't make me feel uncomfortable, but I felt that they made others feel uncomfortable. But then, came the last year, 2020, your Ahmaud Arbery, your Breonna Taylor, your George Floyd. And I suddenly felt that silence is complicity. And I felt like I need to speak up. I also have three, young men at home. I have 3 sons that will be graduating from college this year, 1 getting his MBA and 2 getting their bachelor's degrees. They're away from me. They're away at school. They both, or all 3 of them, don't attend school locally in the Columbus area. So every time they get on the road to go back to school, I'm thinking, what would happen if a cop would pull them over? I could be that mother on the news. I could be, that mother that's crying out and fighting for justice. And so I feel as though the past year for me has been one of great growth professionally and personally, because I felt not only did I change my hair, which is something that, it was a big deal for me, but I also felt like personally, I no longer was silent. When topics came up, uncomfortable conversations, I went with it. I leaned into it. At work, we had some roundtables about, race and diversity and inclusion and equality, and I leaned into it. I made presentations for it and participated in it because I wanted to make sure that I had a voice, because I realized, if nothing else over the past year, if you don't speak up, if you don't, lean in and try to help bring about that change that needs to occur, you're also a part of the problem.
Well, I had an entire mix of emotions. I'm probably the only panelist on here that was part of the civil rights movement as well. Oh, you were too young. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but yes.
I'm that old.
Yes, my
but-
mother was there though.
Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, this past year, especially during the heat of it all, in 2020, there was a intersection of racial recognition, economic disparity, health disparity, and many other things coming together all at one time. And for me, after serving as the mayor of the city and a community leader, civic leader in both the civic community and business community and legal community, I got a lot of calls. And what do we do? How do we do it? What about this? What about that? What's your thinking on this? And every day to me was a combination. At the end of the day, during the heat of it all, I was exhausted. Exhausted from the turmoil that was occurring, while at the same time, I was never more optimistic. At the same time, and proud of the young people in our community and around the country. And proud of the fact that the issues of racial recognition was not just in the Black community, but it had expanded beyond the Black community for the first time since the 60s, really. I would not say it was a rerun of the 60s, but it certainly were some similarities. And so every day to me was meaningful. During this past year, I saw a movement in the city, in the corporate community, legal community, the civic environment, all changed for the better as a result. And when these challenging times come up and you walk through difficult times for a community, you have to come out better at the end of it. And we're not at the end of it. And my hope is that we will all come out better because of the experiences this nation had over this past year. So again, it was partly exhaustion from dealing with it all. The mental suffering, the painfulness of it all personally to me and my family at all levels. Optimistic in that I saw change taking place, and proud because so many people, so many actors, so many parts of society have been impacted as a result. Activism, a new activism that needed to take place occurred during this period of time. And I'm glad it's happening. I don't want to see it to wane away. I don't want to go back to the old days. I don't want to make America great again, as been used before in some discussion. I want to see America become better because of the experience that we've all undergone. So that's the emotion and the things that I had during that past year.
And getting back to normal and just going back to how things were, that's not a welcome idea for many people, for as much as we hear people out there saying it right now.
No, going back to normal is, to me, it's like saying, let's make America great again. And when that was used back in 2016 and, continuing, it reminded me, let's go back to Jim Crow. Let's go back to segregation. Let's go back to the time in which it was okay not to have Black folks on your board. It was okay not to have Black folks in your law firm. That to me is normal. I think as a result of this past year, that there will be a new normal that have come out of the activism of this past year. And the new normal will be that diversity in law firms, from partner to management, all the way through, in business community, at the board level, who they do business with, all the way through. In the civic environment, so much needed to have happen that I think there were steps in the right direction, that we need to see continuation of those steps and not a conclusion of those steps. We've made steps. We haven't gotten to our destination in our journey.
And this concept of and I appreciate your comments, Mayor Coleman. I mean, this idea of returning back to normal, there's a lot of assumptions in there. There's an assumption that time, has somehow resolved things, or I use this analogy. It's not the best one, but it works for me. I used it in a meeting the other day where I'm like, and I can only talk about myself, right? I've had a boyfriend in the past who was less than ideal. You get away from him, and then you break up, and then you don't see each other for a while, and then you see him after a year, and you decide to get back together. You're like, my gosh, you still suck. And you're like, and it's like nothing changed. You just were away from them. You just were away from them for a while. You can this passage, getting back to normal, we have to fix culture, and that requires deliberate activity. That requires a deliberate looking inward and deciding, like, hey, what's working here and what doesn't? I mean, and there's some articles out there, that suggest that statement. And I understand what people mean, because 2020 was traumatic on so many fronts, right? I mean, they say the dueling pandemics, but we had multiple things happening all at the same time, as Mayor Coleman, articulated. I mean, there's so many things going on to contend with. And so people just like, can we just get back to when the world made sense to me? The problem with that is that it only made sense to a certain group. It really, for some folks, never really worked, never made sense, was never comfortable. When we downplay, as we were talking about, we downplay things. When I use the phrase like downplaying my Blackness, I always kind of thought, I don't think I ever thought about it actively that way, but I think what I was in my mind telling myself is, if I just don't engage, or if I just mute myself, water myself down just a bit, then it'll make for a more comfortable, cohesive, better environment. Well, that's not true. It just makes it okay for everybody. I'm still living with that inside, and just now I'm not expressing it, so I'm not bringing my whole self, my best self, to work. And so, yeah, I think this concept of we have to be careful about this, wanting to get back to normal. I understand that we want to return people back to work if we can, and we and want to have an experience where we're interacting with one another, and those things are important, to want to to actually have physical interaction. But I think that we have to pause, and really pay attention to what have we learned over the course of this last year? And what do we need to now bring into our environment so that we return to a place that's more empowering in our workspaces, that's more affirming. There ought to be a safe space after something like George Floyd being murdered on TV. I mean, there was a time when I can think about where we never would have talked about that at work. As a matter of fact, I remember sitting with my children watching the Trayvon Martin verdict and then coming to work. So crying with my boys the night before, coming to work, and nobody mentions it. And so you just have to kind of figure out how to navigate through that emotional trauma and do your work. So if we're still doing that, which I dare say, we have, like I said, we haven't arrived yet by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of work to do. So we have to be very wary of what normal means and make sure that it's not code, it's not code word.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that whenever I hear a return to normal, what I hear is a return to the disenfranchisement of Black and brown people. And that's not okay, right? I think that post 2020, we have to move away from just being okay with allowing people to put out sound bites like, oh, it's African American History Month, so we'll put a commercial out there that features a Black family. Or, oh, it's Pride Month, so we'll raise a flag, right? No, we're not settling for small token changes. We want true change. We want equality. We want for Black and brown people not just to have economic equality, but also to have health care, also to be able to vote, also to have a seat at the table. We have uncovered a rock. I shouldn't even say a rock. 2020 uncovered a boulder. If you look at all of the disparities that kind of came to light, with what occurred to George Floyd. So whenever I hear a return to normal, what I hear is people are ready to put that boulder back in place because they feel uncomfortable with what we've uncovered. They kind of like the status quo. They're comfortable with where they're at. I think that the challenge for all of us on this call, who both the panelists and the people that are participating on the call, or we can all be change agents. We shouldn't go back to where we were before May of 2020. We should not.
Kelly, if you tell me, there's a real fatigue associated with talking about these issues. I know that. I wear the hat as our firm diversity partner. I think people sometimes assume that they think that I love talking about this. I honestly kind of hate it sometimes because there's so much weight attached to it. Right. And you don't get to process how you personally feel in it, but it is what it is. It's not a complaint. It's just, that's a reality. But I think there's a real fatigue, but I shared this with, I think I shared it with you, Kelly, before, but I saw this someplace and I really grabbed hold of it. If you're tired of, to be tired of talking about racism, to be tired of talking about these issues is actually like the height of privilege because you can put it away. We have yet, George Floyd was not the first occurrence. It was just the one that was the most televised. So there's been this recurring trauma for your colleagues, your Black and brown colleagues, that they've just not had any, we spend the largest amount of our time typically is spent in these work environments. Yet it's the place where you really literally for the longest time had to completely leave it off the table. So you come, imagine like one of the most traumatic things happening and you come to work and no one asks you about it.
How you feel.
No one even assume that it impacts you. Or vice versa, because I don't want to make anything about trauma. I remember, and I guess it's not political, but I remember when President Obama was elected. I never thought I'd see something like that in my lifetime. For my children, for my mother who got a chance to vote for a Black president. 43 presidents it took to get to a Black president. We didn't have a discussion about it at all at work because it's political. It's not political. It was it changed something for me personally, for a colleague. And so I think we have to, again, be really, really careful. There's real fatigue, but it's a luxury that I don't think we can afford.
Well, I think also, I think I saw a meme one time because that's where we're at now, right? We see memes all over the place where it said, if you think that you're tired of hearing about it, think about how tired other people are of experiencing it. And it's definitely food for thought. I feel as though, in the workspace, I have been fortunate at times to be able to have those discussions where we've discussed race and diversity and inclusion, but I also feel as though that's a slippery slope as well, too. Why? Because oftentimes in the legal space, there can be few minorities. And so then you become like the spokesperson for your race. And that can also be kind of tiring because I don't want to speak for the entire Black experience. I can only speak for how it impacts me. So I think that we just need to be cognizant and aware, and it shouldn't take an event like what happened to George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery for us to have these discussions. We should have enough inclusion and diversity that it's a normal part of our business operations, talking about things that are impacting the community, period, whether it's the Black community, the Latino community, the Asian community. So it shouldn't take a life-altering, or not life-altering, life-ending video that went global for us to have these important discussions about race and equity and equality.
Well, I think these issues, we need to continue to keep them, there's been a lot of momentum, I think, over the past year or so. And my concern is that going forward, the window will close, and that the momentum that we've seen in our corporate community, our civic environment, will begin to, as someone earlier said, go back to normal. And I'm worried about that. And the momentum needs to carry. And, I remember when a group of businesses came together and sent a letter to City Council, who was considering at the time a resolution declaring that racism was a healthcare crisis as well. It contributed to it. And hundreds of businesses submitted a petition and a letter to City Council, and City Council embraced that. And if you all remember that, what I wonder is today, how many of those same businesses that signed that letter actually did something in their businesses during the past several months, or have plans to do something in the future? I'd be curious to know which of those hundreds that have actually changed their culture or attempted to change their culture, going forward. I am worried about that, worried about the window closing and the momentum slowing on this issue of racial reconciliation and disparities. There are other health disparities out there. And COVID and the pandemic disclosed them naked to the world. George Floyd, everyone saw that video and disclosed the racial issues that face not just police departments, but every part of society, institutional racism. And a lot of good work has happened since then to improve our country, our nation, our city, and our businesses. But that work should not stop now that it's just a year away. And the momentum needs to continue on a consistent institutional way sometimes. I would say I'm very proud of my firm at Ice Miller, the things they've done with the Racial Justice Task Force headed up by Matt Miller, a partner in our firm. Our managing partner is on that Racial Justice Task Force. I'm on it as well. And Diane Menashe and others have really focused in on, for example, impact of race in the administration of the death penalty through a study in Cuyahoga County. The Judicial Release Coalition that Diane Menashe, along with other law firms in the city of Columbus, Voorhees, Baker, Bricker, Squire, Jones Day, and Ice Miller have come together on the access of justice as well. Pro bono work, 10,000 hours of pro bono work just in this past year, targeted towards Black and brown folks, advising minority-owned businesses on financing and coming together. I'm proud of my firm, what they're doing, and what I believe and what keeps me proud is the fact that now that it's not in the news every day, our firm continues to work. And when I see other firms continue to work, and there's others out there, it's not just Ice Miller, coming together to make a difference, that's what I'm proud of, and that's what we need in this country.
So we talk about the hundreds of businesses who signed that letter and sent it to Columbus City Council last summer saying, you need to declare racism a public health crisis. That was an amazing moment. And I, like you, Mayor Coleman, I wonder how many of them have really done something. And that got me to the point of saying, well, is a year enough time to really do something? And Don and Kelly and I talked about this, and I think the answer is yes. Yes, a year is enough time to do something. And so I'm wondering if you all can talk to us about, firms may be wondering what are some things they can do that don't take 5 years, that don't take 10 years. What are ways to start changing the culture?
I mean, it's and Mayor Coleman just hit on it. I mean, he should be proud of all that. We are too. I mean, I am with Barnes and Thornburg and have been my entire career, which is I think, a testament in and of itself, because well before I'm a partner with the firm and have been since 2005, but well before I always say, like, well before diversity, equity, inclusion was sexy and everybody's talking about it everywhere. I mean, our firm, I felt very free and able to move forward into our equity partner ranks and have been there. And now, like I said, where the hat is our firm diversity partner. And even in just the last year, so you talk about like what can be done in a year. I mean, even in just the last year, but we've established, 3 separate, for instance, racial justice committees, a racial justice foundation that allowed us to give away $200,000 last year to organizations who were getting after it, really trying to move the needle in terms of eradicating racism and social injustice. And then in 2 racial justice committees, one focused in the markets that we serve, and then one focused internally, which I think is perhaps the most critical and the best place to start for organizations trying to figure out, like, what do we do? You've got to look internally at your structure. I mean, you can put statements out, you can say all sorts of things. They're important. Those things are important, but you have to, at the end of the day, like I said, look at and deliberately make steps to shift your culture. I'm a huge fan, still am and was a huge fan of Maya Angelou. And during her last interview, known interview, I think, before her death, she made a comment when they asked her about what her advice was for the next generation. And she was like, tell the truth to yourself first. And I think it's just a powerful moment. The rest of the interview is amazing, but I think that's powerful. And I think that's what organizations have to do. You want to know what you can do? Tell the truth to yourself first. Like, what do you look like? I mean, step back and look at your leadership. Who's there? Who's not there? Who's in the pipeline? Look at your department heads, your office heads. Look at your partnership, those sorts of things. And then once you look at it, you assess, because it's not about right or wrong, good or bad, or anything like that. If you're like, we don't have the right representation, or we're not reflective of what we say we care about, then what's one thing? What's the best next step we can take to begin to shift that? And so, I'm not saying you have to go out and start a foundation or anything like that, but it could be, hey, we're going to look at and we're doing some of these things. We're going to look at what's the success journey look like, for instance, for our Black female talent. What's the, what do our numbers look like as we forecast out, and what can we do to begin to shift that, and making sure that everyone begins to understand what our goals are in that regard. You can cultivate a pipeline, because yes, you have people in your organization, but it's really critical to invest in if you don't see it, build it, right? So we established, for instance, a BT pre-law scholars program that's reaching back and saying, there are a lot of kids who want to go to law school, Black and brown kids want to go to law school, and they have barriers that are things like, I can't pay for the LSAT, or I don't even know how to do this. And so we're like, we can fix that. And so we start investing in things like that. So there's all sorts of things. At the end of the day, I think the organizations, whether you're a firm or a corporate environment, have to decide whether you're interested or committed. They're very, very different. If you're interested in DEI, you will do it only when it feels good. You'll do it only when someone's looking. You'll do it only when you feel kind of pressed. A client's pushing you, if you got to check a box for a survey, or something of that nature. But when you're committed to it, you'll do it when it's hard. You'll do it when nobody's looking. You'll have those conversations that are really, really uncomfortable when it's not going to show up in the Law 360 article. You're going to do that stuff and you're going to keep after it. I mean, I think one of the dangers, and I'll stop here. One of the dangers of this is that, this is a 400+ year-old problem. And because people want to win and check a box, they want everything done tomorrow. And I do think we can do something, Katie. You can, like I said, we can do something now, but that doesn't mean you failed if you don't resolve racism right now. I mean, like by tomorrow. That's just not going to happen. You have to get after it. This is hard work, and it's a hard work not just of your CDO or your chief diversity officer or whatever the title is. It's the hard work of everybody. If the organization truly, truly cares about it, this is something that's going to be integrated into every aspect of how you do business, which is certainly something we've done and endeavor to continue to do to make sure for us that the business of diversity, equity, and inclusion is completely synonymous with the business of Barnes and Thornburg. We're not there yet, but we're pushing, we're striving for that every day. But those are things, little things that you can begin to do every day.
I say
I
for
think
those businesses that have wrote the letter and signed the letter to City Council regarding that resolution of racism and health issues and disparities, that the first step is looking in the mirror, taking that mirror and making a critical assessment of what you are doing yourself to impact racial justice and disparities in your own business. And there's people out here that do that can help you walk through it. So just making the self-assessment and being aware of where you stand is a big step. Up until now, only the big companies have really looked, and some other companies, I can't say only them, but it hasn't been the thing to do. Companies like Nationwide has done an excellent job over the years in looking in the mirror and reassessing itself and getting business opportunities out to minorities. And you look at its culture and the number of Black folks that are through and through in its table of organization. But the smaller companies, the medium-sized companies, the accounting firms, the law firms, the grocery store, all need to have a self-assessment to determine where their baseline is and have goals going forward.
I agree. I think that first, I'd like to say it's an economic imperative. I attended, I think it's maybe 2 years ago, because I think it was like the year before the pandemic hit. I attended an event in New York that was held by Diversity Inc. Most people know what Diversity Inc. is, leading organization that, tells corporations across America kind of how they're doing with I&D. And one of the things that they pointed out in this event that I went to is that there is going to be pretty much a browning of America around about 2042, if you look at the way that the demographic trends are looking today. So it's an economic imperative. Why? Because in today's society where you can get information at the drop of a dime, you look on your phone and you get breaking news about what Nationwide's doing or about what IBM is doing with I&D. And, around that, you do have some cancel culture, good, bad, or indifferent. People tend to shop based upon what companies tend to align with their beliefs. And, whether companies are hiring people that look like them or, believe the same things that they do. And so I think it's incumbent upon corporations to look at, who do you have in the C-suite? Do you have women there? Do you have ethnic minorities there? But don't start just at the top, right? I mean, you have to start at the beginning. You have to really start building your pipeline. How many people do you have in the pipeline? Because, someday those people at the top are going to retire and move on. Are you building out your pipeline so that, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but a year from now, 2 years from now, you will have women and ethnic minorities in the pipeline. And if you find that you aren't, there are certain things that you can do, like look at attrition, right? Who's leaving? Is it, African-American females? Is it Asian men? what are the reasons why they're leaving? Most corporations have access to this information. If you dig a little bit deeper into that information, you can then begin to plan, oh, okay, well, maybe it's that childcare is an issue. Maybe it's that they don't see promotion opportunities. Well, what type of promotion opportunities do we have here for, Asian men or African-American females? So there's a lot that we can do. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but I mean, you got to look at your top, you got to look at your beginning, and start building out that pipeline.
Let me
because
just
it is an
add
economic
to
imperative.
that, Kelly, just exactly what you're saying. Another thing I get a little concerned about is diversity of a business or law firm or accounting firm is not just that one Black person. That's practicing tokenism. That one Black person on the board, we are now diverse. That one woman on the board, we are now diverse. No, that's not developing a cultural diversity. That's not developing that pipeline. And I'm concerned about that one person or two people being placed in that firm becomes, well, now we're diverse. No, that's not enough. You have to carry on, build the pipeline, transform the culture in the process. And anything less is tokenism. That combined with the notion that when you have, for example, clients that have a strong diversity bent to work with law firms and accounting firms and other service organizations, that law firm doesn't bring that one African American to the table for that first meeting, and they're no longer there thereafter. You know what I mean when I'm saying that, Dawn? There's tokenism on both ways. So it needs to be, diversity needs to be a practice that's part of your culture, and not just because a client wants you to be diverse for a specific representation, but you're not culturally diverse throughout. So those two things I worry about as well.
KD, just real quick. I mean, and I know exactly what you mean, Coleman. I've experienced it. And so, data is everything. Data rules. And so, one, in terms of like what can you do? What's one thing you can do, right? You can take away. We measure in law firms, certainly. I can't speak about any other environments. We measure everything. But DEI has oftentimes been left off to the sidelines, and all we've counted are butts and seats. And there's so much more to the story than that. And so begin to measure, things like who's coming up for promotions, who, in terms of trends, how long is the period of time from, one benchmark to the next, from associate to partner, if that's, your environment or however you structure it. And is that consistent, across the board? Or are there just, are there gaps in there, or are there differences based upon different groups? All those sorts of things. Begin to look at and harness your data, identify where the gaps are. That way then goes back to that, tell yourself the truth. So you don't have to say, we're doing fine. We're doing fine. Don't you see we're doing fine? Like, you don't have to see that we're doing fine. I can show you, like, here's where we are. And it's not about a quota. It's just understanding the first rule. What is it? The first rule of a map is knowing where you are. Because you can't, otherwise you're just kind of shooting in the dark, and you're just then doing things because an article told you that you should do it, or another open letter was written in Law 360 that said that we should do it, as opposed to what is right sized for you. But knowing your data is a great place to start, to really understand who's in your system, who's been who's giving opportunities, who's being developed, who's not, who has mentors, who doesn't, all those sorts of things, so that you can begin to make shifts. One of the biggest things, that I, think about for a law firm environment, something we're certainly, we've moved into is, who's on your matters. I mean, you ought to know what your percentage is. Who am I using? You're like, I'm doing great. Well, do you use any women or minority talent on your matters? You can check that. I'm sure you have that data. You can check it and then hold yourself accountable. Again, not to a quota, but to being better.
Well, and I'd also challenge, because, I've heard at different times, folks saying, well, there's just a lack of diverse talent you know, as far as ethnic minorities are concerned, women and ethnic, well, not women per se, but ethnic minorities are concerned. And so I challenge you, you know, are you looking at diverse bars? There are also several organizations such as like the Minority Corporate Counsel Association, et cetera, NAMWOLF, that will help you, you know, find diverse attorneys to like staff matters. And so I challenge folks that say, well, there's just a lack out there. Are you really trying? Are you really looking? Because if you are looking, there are several organizations from the affinity bars to, you know, I think like in Columbus, there's JMBLA. I mean, every city has affinity bars. Every state has affinity bars. And like I said, several organizations that can help you find diverse attorneys if you're looking for them.
Because the talent is out there. You just have to look harder.
That's right.
Partner with HBCUs. There's been a lot of controversial legislation during the past year, with critical race theory to police reform and voting rights. And then there's Juneteenth. Was the Juneteenth legislation a surface level win? Was it? Talk to me about the meaningfulness of that.
I don't think it was surface. I just think there's more. And we just can't, I don't want us to get lost there. And if not careful, it can be confused with the work that remains, or it could cover over the work that remains. I mean, so because I don't want to ever take away from that. I mean, it's something that should have been acknowledged a long time ago. But if it's a false statement, I think if someone, if someone says, I mean, look, we're there, we've arrived. See, Juneteenth. That was the same statement when President Obama was elected. It's like, hey, what's the problem? We have a Black president. There are no more issues of race. Like, no, not at all. That's not the truth. And so it's a good thing, but it's by no means enough. And people have to be, I think, certainly, and I with the hat that I get to wear, that I'm privileged to wear at our firm, try to be careful about these things, because again, you have to figure out what works and what makes sense for your organization. But when Juneteenth came, before the legislation, there was a lot of conversation about whether or not we should take, it should be a day off, and should be all these different, there's all this conversation. And I don't, and then it became a little bit of shaming, because I think sometimes, and you have to forgive me, but some of these publications are out there. I think that's kind of how they make their living, by creating the next thing that people can buy for one way or the other. I got this on this scorecard, and I got this on this thing. We take Juneteenth off and you don't. We're better. And none of those things, quite frankly, in and of themselves are true. I don't have any problem saying this. Like, when you think about like the diversity scorecard, the American Lawyer Diversity Scorecard this year. And I don't know if anybody's represented, but as a Black person, this is hard for me. And we had these conversations with some of my counterparts who were in this role for their organizations. The number one firm, the number one diversity, in terms of diversity on that list for 2 years in a row has no Black partners. Zero. Last year, it was the top 5 that had 0. This year, I think 3 out of the top 5 have 0, but definitely number 1, 2 years in a row. And, my peer in another organization said to me, she felt the day it came out, she's like, I just feel very failed today, because I feel like what they're saying is diversity can work just fine without me. And so we have to be careful about these messages and these things that we reward in the sake, for the sake of real progress. So I don't impugn Juneteenth. That's great. I applaud that. And those firms who take it off, that's great. But I can't talk about any other organization. I'm not tasked with that responsibility for any other organization but ours. But I know for me, and relative to Barnes and Thornburg, for me, it needs to be authentic, and it needs to be things that we're doing that are really, truly going to move the ball. I would give away Juneteenth all day long for a change in the way, for instance, some of these C-suites look, or some of these, partnerships look, or all those sorts of things. I mean, I want to make sure that we're focused on things that really, really are creating opportunity, economic progress for women and people of color, or women in other diverse groups, as opposed to just living with, hey, we have this. So I think you just have to, it's a good thing, but we're not done by any stretch of the imagination, Katie. That's the world according to Dawn, but that's how I think about that.
I agree. Whenever I first heard about Juneteenth, I mean, like everybody else, I'm happy that I get an extra day off, but it kind of reminded me of that childhood game, Mother May I, where you take, one step, but you see all the steps that you still need to take ahead of you. One thing that we know about history is if you don't learn from it, you're doomed to repeat it, right? And so what I thought about when I heard that Juneteenth was passed, well, what about, the policing legislation? What about that? Because that's kind of what kind of started all of this hubbub that got us to recognizing Juneteenth as a holiday, or, the 3 incidents that occurred last year. What about that? Let's not lose sight of those things. What about the fact that, they're trying to further restrict voting rights in several states? I hope that organizations, without getting on a political soapbox, will become active, continue to have an active voice, much like the MLB did when they took their all-star game out of Atlanta. It's going to take courageous actions like that for us to continue to move the dial forward. So again, much like Dawn, while I'm not impugning Juneteenth when they made it a national holiday, but I did think to myself, we still have a ways to go, and it's going to continue to be companies and organizations that have that bring revenue to these states that help move the dial forward, continue to help move the dial forward.
I'll agree with everything that has been said by my 2 predecessor speakers, 100%. And I'll put it this way. I think Juneteenth and its celebration and recognition is a great thing in America, but it is part of the journey. It is not the destination.
Great. Well, let's open it up and see if there's any questions that the audience might be wanting to ask. If you have questions, just go ahead and turn on your camera, unmute yourself, and ask us.
Hi, everyone. I'm not going to turn on my camera. This is Erica Thompson from the Columbus Dispatch. But I really would love to hear your thoughts on critical race theory, because it's such a hot topic, and it seems like a lot of people don't know what the definition of it is. And it's really about legislation and the legal system. So I would just love to hear from a lawyer on what you think about this controversy over critical race theory.
Well, let me give you my points of view on it, and mix it in with a little bit of law. But my point of view on it is, I think it's important that the education system is able to discuss and teach the truth in America. And sometimes the truth doesn't line up with how certain folks want America to be viewed. I think America is the greatest country in the world. At the same time, slavery, discrimination, disparity is very much a part of who we are and where we came from. It shaped our nation in every single way. And to be truthful about that in our discussion about our history, I think is important. And that an attempt to make the truth unlawful, to me, is I mean, it feels like, legislation forcing local school districts not to discuss the evolution theory in the classroom. It is, the truth has been covered up for a long time. When I was in high school, which was a long time ago, of course, they taught slavery. I remember that. But slavery was a reason for the Civil War. But a bigger reason taught in my classroom was states' rights. And I thought about that in hindsight, but that's what we were taught in high school. And when not until I went to college, was it totally clear to me that Civil War was all about slavery and how certain states viewed slavery. And I just think it is another, I'll get a little political, another thing that the ultra-conservative, radical conservative folks use as a wedge to separate communities, to divide communities. And I see it as another wedge. And it seems to me the school districts need to teach the truth. They should not be told by any legislature on what they should teach in history. They should always teach the truth. What really happened. And so I think the movement to eliminate and to limit or eliminate the truth of history is the inappropriate thing to do in America.
Yeah.
It violates free speech. It violates so many things in my thinking. It's just wrong. And it's going to add to division in our nation, not to unity. We need to understand where we've been before we can understand where we go. And our history matters as it relates to our future.
It's racism is not, not born. We're not born with it. We're taught it.
Right.
And I agree 100% with what Mayor Coleman just articulated. It's the to me, this kind of goes to the heart of all the things we're talking about. I mean, Kelly, I think you remarked when we were talking before. I mean, it's kind of funny to be talking about Juneteenth, yet you don't want to talk about what the heck Juneteenth is even celebrating.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely kind of crazy. And when I read something in an article, there's an article that says like the teaching of critical race theory is un-American. I understand that if the only America you've ever known didn't include me, I get it, or didn't include me. I mean, we think about this, it's absolutely debilitating to leave this out of the story for our children, for the future of where we're going. It's hard, but that doesn't mean it's not necessary. And it's hard for everyone, but it's the reason why I personally think, and certainly as a practitioner, why we are still here contending with these things is because we've acted as if it doesn't exist. And so for those who are in the majority and have the power and able to control the laws and control different things, are able to kind of build walls around that story they've told. But those of us who, I think, and I shouldn't even say those of us who know, because, I don't even remember slavery learning about slavery in school. I learned it because I decided to take an elective, really learn and just started doing a deep dive in things. That's not enough. And there's so many, it keeps us divided. And I think that it's an effort to keep us divided as a nation, regardless of where you fall down politically. And I think it's dangerous. It's not surprising to me at all, but I think it's incredibly dangerous. And I think that as we look to things that we can do, we really need to, I think, look for ways to be on the right side of history in this regard, from a legal perspective.
I'll keep my comment there.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I'll keep my comment fairly brief, but I think that it's imperative that we keep, right? I mean, from a young age, much like you, Mayor Coleman, I was taught that it was about states' rights. You're indoctrinating children.
Can't hear you so well, Kelly.
Huh? Can you hear me?
There you go. Now
Okay.
you can.
Okay, so you're indoctrinating young children, because kids in elementary school are impressionable, right? And you're teaching them the wrong set of facts, right? Knowledge breeds understanding. And what I fear is the truth is that we have, some folks in the political structure that want to keep us divided, right? Because that knowledge breeds understanding. I mean, let's face it, we're all taught at a very, very young age that, about the American dream, that anybody can grab themselves up by the bootstraps. If you just work hard, you can achieve your dreams. You can have the big home, the picket fence, the 2.5 kids, take your 3 vacations a year, et cetera. Yet when you look around and you see the disparities amongst, folks in different communities, you're like, oh, wow. I mean, it's easy to assume, well, they just must not be working hard, because if they worked hard, they'd be doing better. I think that it's imperative that, critical race theory is taught, because you have to understand the underpinnings behind that, the historical, roadblocks that were put in the way to prevent folks of color, women and people of color, honestly, from getting ahead and from achieving true equality. And so as long as we're unwilling to teach that to children, you'll have generations of people that will continue to grow up assuming, well, I just must be working harder than the next person, and that's why I'm doing well. It has nothing to do at all with these historical constructs that were put in their way to prevent them from getting ahead. And I feel like we're doing our nation a disservice by continuing down that path.
Everyone, thank you so much. We're going to throw it now, just to be mindful of time, to Bill Nolan, managing partner of Barnes and Thornburg, who will have a final thought for us.
Yeah, no, thank you, Katie, and thanks everybody for joining, and the panelists. Yeah, I'm not going to try to top any of that, but I think it's we've got a lot of good questions and comments in the sidebar. So after our last one, we connected with somebody at the Legal Aid Society who was attending, and did a training for summer associates and law clerks on sort of introductory issues. That was just a connection made on one of these. So I just hope people joining here find somebody that said something that resonated with them, whether it's a panelist or somebody else, and connect with them and do a little something to keep the ball moving. So thanks everybody for participating and joining.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks to all our panelists for sharing your stories, your insights. It means a lot to keep hearing, to keep seeing new ways of your thinking and experiences that we all need to know about. And I deeply appreciate that you're a part of this today. And I want to thank Katie and the CEO staff, everyone in attendance, and again, the Barnes and Thornburg and Frost Brown Todd for being on this journey together to take a focus on the diversity in the law. So this webinar will be available for viewing at columbusceo.com. We'll share it on social as well. So this will be able to go beyond what we're just doing today. Plus, we have a print version of this discussion that will appear in the August issue of Columbus CEO. So lots of way to spread the word about what was spoken today. So thank you and take care, everyone.